So A Mixolydian. D Mixolydian. Back to A Mixolydian. Now we're going to go to E Mixolydian. D Mixolydian. A Mixolydian. Awesome, right? So that works really well. Hey everybody, Gary here with Guitar Tricks, and in this video I'm going to go over a whole bunch of different scales that you could use over standard blues progression. So this is an A blues. We've got the chords A7, D7, and E7. And what's cool about these chords is that they're both major and kind of minor. We've got a major triad, but then a minor 7. That's what a dominant 7 chord is. If you don't understand that right now, that's okay. Just know that that ambiguity of these chords gives us the opportunity to play both major scales and minor scales, and sometimes some sound good and sometimes others sound good. So I'm going to go over how you can use minor pentatonic, major pentatonic, the blues scale, Mixolydian, Dorian, and put all these together in your improvisation. But even though I'm going to do that, I want you to realize that there's no right or wrong notes. You could play any note you think sounds good, and that's all that matters. If you think it sounds good, that is what matters. So music theory is just a way of organizing how people generally put notes together. It comes after the music, right? So it's helpful, it helps connect the dots, it gives you different ideas, different approaches, but always keep in the back of your mind to trust your ear. All right, before we get into the lesson, please go ahead and click subscribe so that you get all the latest and greatest content from Guitar Tricks, and if you want to be notified of any new lesson, be sure to tap the bell. All right, so we're going to start with minor pentatonic. Now what's great about minor pentatonic, A minor pentatonic in the key of A, is that that scale contains all the root notes and most of the notes of all 3 chords, so it works over every chord. So I'm just going to play straight minor pentatonic in the key of A minor pentatonic. I'm not going to change scales. Coming up on the 5 chord to the 4. See, all the root notes of each chord are in the scale. Now I'm going to play major pentatonic. Classic major pentatonic right there. Now one thing this one is missing is the root note of the 4 chord, and it also has the major 7th of the 4 chord, which doesn't really match. It's got the root of the 5, so now I'm going to play it over the 5 chord. On the 4 chord, I'm going to come back down. So I came back down to the minor pentatonic on the 4 chord because I wanted to hit that root note. It's not part of that scale, and I like the way that A minor pentatonic sounds over the 4 chord. So again, I just like it because I like it. So A major pentatonic is going to generally, in my opinion, sound good, A major pentatonic over the 1 and the 5 chord, and over the 4 chord I feel like it's missing something. So we're going to consider different options. You can go back to A minor pentatonic, or I'm going to show you other options right now. So first let's look at So we looked at minor pentatonic, major pentatonic. Now let's look at the blues scale, which is just adding one note to the minor pentatonic, right? It just adds that blue note like this. Here's classic. So it's just this little passing tone. All right, now let's take a look at A Dorian mode. So this is just like minor pentatonic, sounds great on all of the chords, A Dorian mode. Because the two notes that we add to minor pentatonic to create Dorian mode are this one and this one. And this first note is the 5th of the 5 chord. It's also the 9th of the 1 chord. And then this note is the 3rd, the major 3rd of the 4 chord. So these notes all play a big role as chord tones, and they also just sound great as scale tones. So check it out. I'm going to play A Dorian mode throughout the progression. That note that works really well on the 4 chord. See, that note works really good on the 5. All right, now let's take a look at Mixolydian mode. So Mixolydian, if we just play the Mixolydian of the 1 chord over the whole progression, it'll work. Because this one, unlike the major pentatonic of the A chord, contains all the root notes, so it's got a lot of money notes. So I'm just gonna play A Mixolydian over everything. It's not the strongest though, in my opinion, on the 5 chord because it's got a minor 3rd of the 5, and then it's also got a major 7th on the 4, so those are a half step away from the chord tones. So even though A Mixolydian works over everything, it doesn't quite outline the chords as well as if I actually play the Mixolydian mode for each chord. So check this out, I'm going to do A Mixolydian, D Mixolydian, E Mixolydian, depending on what chord I'm on. So A Mixolydian, D Mixolydian, back to A Mixolydian. Now we're going to go to E Mixolydian. D Mixolydian. A Mixolydian. Awesome, right? So that works really well. All right, let's try one last thing. We're gonna play the Dorian mode for each chord and see how that sounds. All right, so 1 chord. Four chord. Not too good in my opinion. dark. Let's try it on the 5. Whoa, okay, so let's talk about some lessons here. All right, so in my opinion, playing the Dorian mode over the 5 chord that goes with the 5 chord, which is E Dorian, sounded mint. The 4 chord didn't sound too great. It was too minor, included some notes we didn't want in there. And then over the 1 chord, obviously sounded great. And even though I didn't demonstrate, the same is true of minor pentatonic. So A minor pentatonic obviously sounds great over all the chords. D minor pentatonic doesn't really sound good over the D chord or the 4 chord, but E minor pentatonic sounds good over the 5 chord E. All right, now let's see if we can play the accompanying major pentatonic scale on each chord. Now I'm going to go to D major pentatonic. Back to the A. Now to the 5. So let's summarize the discoveries here. So over the 1 chord A7, we can do A minor pentatonic, A blues, A major pentatonic, A Mixolydian mode, A Dorian mode. Over the 4 chord, we can do A minor pentatonic, A blues, A Mixolydian mode, A Dorian. So all those same ones except A major pentatonic doesn't really work because it doesn't have the root. And again, this is all subjective, my opinion, my preferences. D Mixolydian mode works awesome, which is A Dorian mode. So that's a little bit of music theory. They're relative modes, A Dorian and D Mixolydian. So you'll notice when you learn D Mixolydian, you're also playing the same notes that comprise A Dorian. Going into why that's so is another lesson. The 5 chord, we have the most options. A minor pentatonic, A blues, A major pentatonic, A Mixolydian mode, which is E Dorian mode, so we could also do E Dorian. They're the same thing for the same reasons that A Dorian and D Mixolydian were the same. E minor pentatonic, sounds awesome. A Dorian mode, A major, which is also the same as E Mixolydian mode. So lots of options there on the 5 chord, least options on the 4 chord, and then very straightforward options on the 1 chord. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that lesson and you got a few more ideas for how you might improvise over a standard blues progression. So just through the process of doing this, I kind of put a name on things that I do without really necessarily thinking about it, just kind of automatic. So with all of this being said about which scale works over which chord, the elephant in the room, so to speak, is that it's all about the chord tones, right? Each one of these chords has 4 chord tones. We have a root 3rd, 5th, flat 7th, root 3rd, 5th, flat 7th, root 3rd, 5th, flat 7th. And that's really the only thing that's determining which scales work or not, is how do they relate to the chord. Now there's one other thing, which is in the blues, the sound of a minor 3rd against a major 3rd is part of the genre. So in that sense, the fact that that minor 3rd isn't the chord tone is part of the sound of the blues. But that's really only on the 1 chord, the minor 3rd of the 1 chord. But the point is, but the reason why some of this I figured out as I was explaining it was because I tend to think about the chord tones. Like I know this tone sounds great over the 4 chord. And I know this tone sounds great on the 1 chord and the 5 chord. So when I'm adding those notes in, it's less that I'm like, oh, Dorian mode. It's more that I'm like, oh, those specific notes are what I'm looking for, and they happen to be within that mode. So I guess the point of the story is, don't just think about scales, think about chord tones, and even a better thing to say than that is ultimately don't think about it, just hear it, right? And try to get to a point where you're like, I know what sound I'm looking for. That's the sound that I want to hear over that chord, right? So use your ear, explore, see what you think sounds good, and then put a name on it. But the sound comes first. Sound first, then putting the name on it, right? The theory just follows what we've all decided sounds good and works well together. All right, everybody, if you want to learn more about this stuff, take the whole blues course. There's 2 levels of that, or maybe 3 levels at guitartricks.com, taught by Anders, I believe, who's an awesome instructor. Happy playing, have fun with this stuff, and I'll see you in the next lesson.